Hi, this is going to be a short video about creating a post request to the API so that we can register a user for the Diablo 2 MERN application that we're working on. So let's jump in. I want to do a little bit of a cleanup video first, just as to add a little bit more logging into our application. So to get there, what we're going to do is in this database connection, I realized we're not really logging anything to help us know when it's been connected. So let's just make a connection variable here. And then we want to log what host it's being connected to. So we can do a console.log and we can do Mongo is connected on or connected to. Then we can do con.connection.host. And that should now be able to log what host it's connected to when it's connected. So that should be helpful. And then this error message, we can add a little bit more here too. We can say something like database connect has encountered an error. And then we can just output the error.message here. So that should help us if we see an error that we know the connect method is where the error came from, just a little more clear. And then also another thing I wanted to do is make the port configurable for the application, for the API. So let's create just a really quick variable. I'm going to call API port equals process.env API port or 5000. Now, what this is doing is basically if they have an environment variable set to API port, it'll use that, or it'll default to 5000. So then down here, we can just use the API port variable instead. And just for more clarity, like the other areas, we can say what port we're listening on. So started listening on port, and let's change this to API port. Just like that. Okay, now that should be a little bit more useful. Let's test it out really quick. npm run server, because we had that set up before. And there you go. Started listening on port 5000 and Mongo is connected to the cluster there. So just a little bit of helpfulness there. So that's good. And then another thing I wanted to do was for development, it's really nice if we don't have to start and stop the server so many times. So to set that up, we already installed the package called nodemon, but we didn't create a script to actually use it. So what I want to do here is in the scripts, we're going to add a script that uses nodemon, and we're going to call it watch. So we do watch, we're going to say nodemon, and it's the same file as if we were starting the server, and we just say watch instead. So now if we go here, we can go to, all right, I've shooed that goblin away that was behind me. But to run that script, all you do now is just do an npm run watch, if I can spell. And it'll say nodemon watching the server index.js and the other files. So when you do this, what'll happen, like say we want to change our index.js for whatever reason, if you save this file, you'll see the server restart. See, so you can see it restarting due to changes, or you can add in a console.log here and hit save, and it starts it over, and you can see the console log is actually there. So now to run your server in development mode, so the API can just restart itself, run npm run watch with this added command here. So another little helpful thing. And yeah, so the next thing we're going to do, we're going to go through and create a new model for our users. Then we're going to create a controller for the users, set up the routes. And then after all of that is set up, we're going to use Postman to test it out. So let's get going here. Okay, so first things first, let's create that model. So let's go into our models folder, create a new file. Let's call it user model. And in here, we're going to want to import the Mongoose package. We're going to use that to create the model. And we're also going to import bcrypt. And this is going to be so that we can hash a password that gets passed into us. And that'll allow some basic authentication and authorization type stuff. So that'll be useful. And then we are also going to import, we're going to create another file with a simple hash password function, so that any file we need to hash a password, it'll be only one place that we do that from. So anyway, it'll be a reusable piece. We'll go in and create that in just a moment. And then what we want to do here is in Mongoose, like we did with the test model, if you remember, we created a schema like this. So in fact, I'm just going to copy and paste this piece over here. So we're going to create a user schema instead. And instead of a message, we're going to use a really simple structure. So we're going to use a username, and it's going to be of a type string. And we're going to say that it's required for creating a user. You have to have a username. So you just do a required true. And then the other piece we want is a password. So again, super simple structure here. You can get as complex as you want, but for what we're doing and the simple examples, yeah, this is all we're going to do. So we're also going to make it required. So for a user to call the API, create a, or for the for the client, there we go. For the client to come in and create a user, it needs these two fields. And that as an optional value after the object, you can pass in a timestamps. Sorry, this is an options object. You can pass in timestamps true. And what this will do is it'll create a couple extra pieces of information about when a document was created. So created at, updated at, those kind of things. So yeah, that is the schema. And I'm using Prettier to auto format things. If I didn't mention that before, that's when I saved it, changed things around for me. Okay, so that's the structure we want to use. Now, a couple things that is useful to know about Mongoose is you can add methods onto instances of this kind of structure. So to do that, all we have to do is take our user schema, and then you say methods, and you name the method whatever you want. So we're going to call this one match password. And you just create a function here, and it'll make it available to any model or instance that's a part of the schema. So this is how you add methods in the Mongoose world. And I'm still learning it too, but this is how you can do it. And what we're going to use is bcrypt in here to try to match the hash password. So bcrypt.compare password, and that's what we got there. Okay, so this will just be a reusable function when we need to match the passwords up. And then another piece that we want in here is whenever we save a new user document, we want the password not saved in plain text. We want it to be hashed. So that's what we're going to add here is a Mongoose I think it's called a middleware hook. Could be wrong about that. But basically anytime a document is going to be saved, it'll run this function. So this is how we set that up. So again, you start with a user schema and you call pre, so it's the pre hook. And we're going to say before it saves, we're going to add a function here. And this function will take a next parameter. And we only want this thing to happen when a password is being changed. So we're going to add only run when password changes, just as a comment so we know. And if not, this dot is modified password, and this is referencing the field above that we defined. And we will just call next. So that basically is just going to be skipping the hash if the password was not changed or modified. But if it was modified, or if it's new, we're going to do this password equals, we're going to call our function that we're going to go actually create in a moment, this dot password. So again, all that's going to do is before Mongoose goes to save a document, it's going to hash it and then save it. So that way we're not storing plain text passwords in the database, which is obviously a really bad idea. And then we need to go and export these so we can use them in other files. So let's just do const user mongoose.model. And just like with the test model we did earlier, you pass in the name of the model you want it to be, and then the schema. And export default user. Okay. Cool. I'll actually get rid of that space there. Okay, so now let's go create that hash password function so that we can not run into a bunch of errors when we try to use this. So over in your server directory, create a new folder. We're going to call this utils. And we're going to create a new file in it called hash password. And it's going to be pretty simple. We're going to import bcrypt again, because this is what we're going to use to actually encrypt it or hash it. And it's bcrypt.js. All right. And so again, this is a reusable function for hashing the password the same way every single time. Because if you hash it a different way, then you won't be able to decrypt it and check things. So it's good to have one way to hash it. So let's actually create this function. So async function hash password. And how this is working is we just call bcrypt. We add a salt, and we in here you can just add a little salt into it so that it can help with the hashing. Const. All right, and then hash password is going to equal, again, we're going to use bcrypt and hash, and we're going to pass the salt in here along with our password first. Had to make sure I was getting those right. Cool. And then we're just going to return that hash password. So that should be our hash password function. So it creates a salt, takes the password it has, adds the salt to it, gets the hash, and then that'll end up being stored in our database. So that's what that is. Okay, now that we have the user model ready, what we need to do is create what will happen when the API is requested to create a user. So to do that, we're going to create a controller file. This kind of just cleans up the request from the actual logic as to what's happening. So let's go and create a user features section here. So in server, create a new folder, call it features. And inside of features, we're going to create a user controller.js file. And then here, we're going to import the model that we just created so that we can work with it. Models, user model.js. Okay. And now we want to do is handle the creation of a new user document. Okay, so we're going to call this a function and we're going to name it register user. So export const register user. And this is going to take 3 parameters. So this controller is an express handler, and all express handlers receive the response, or sorry, the request, the response, and you can give it the next parameter to handle errors or to create middleware and other things like that. But here it's going to be for error handling. So what we want to do is we're going to open up a try catch block here, and we need to get, because what the user is going to do is they're going to send the username that they want the user to have and the password that they want the user to have in the body of their request. So here we're going to get those from the body, username and password. And we're going to destructure these from the request.body. And to do this piece, in fact, I'm going to save this and we'll move over to our index.js. We have to use a little piece of middleware called JSON. So let's see here. Okay, just want to make sure I get it right. So we start our Express or create our Express app, and we need to set up the middleware to populate JSON request.body from a JSON request body. All right, and to do that, you say app.use, and this is a built-in piece of middleware. You just say express.json. So that's all it is. So what that's going to do is in our user controller, this parameter, this dot body off of the request, is going to be generated for the request. But to do that, we had to have this piece of middleware there. Otherwise, it wouldn't be populated. So just keep in mind that when you see this request body, it's this express.json that's populating that. So just wanted to make sure I pointed that out, because if you haven't done it before, it is a little bit confusing figuring out why it does that. So in any case, let's keep creating our controller here, and we'll keep going. Okay. So now what we want to do when someone tries to create a user, we want to make sure that they're not already a user in the system. So we're going to make a comment here, just make sure the user doesn't already exist. And to do that, we just need to do a query to the database to see if someone already has the same username. So we're going to do this. So wait, and we're going to do user. So using the model from above, find and username. So this is going to look and see if any document in the users collection has this username, and it'll find it or not. So if it does find it, what we want to do is obviously not create another one, because we need this to be unique. So status, we'll do a 400, and we're going to throw a new error and say that username is not available. So this response.status is going to be the HTTP status that gets returned to the client who made the request. So if we find a user with the username already, we're going to send a 400 status and the message of that username is not available. So pretty straightforward so far. And then what we want to do now, if it's not found, if a user is not found with that username, we need to set up our new user. So we can do const new user equals, and we can do username password, almost exactly like above. Now we are taking it straight from the body and putting it right back in here. But this is one way where later there might be some fields that you don't want to come from the body into here. So we're just making it explicitly again. But it is kind of unnecessary if you're not going to change anything there. Just up to you. Okay, and then to actually save the user in the database, we want to do a call to user again. And we're going to say create new user. And this will create it in the Mongo database, or at least attempt to, and then we got to make sure about it, right? So if the user was saved, we want to respond with the user that was created. So let's do a JSON saved user, just really simple. And then else, so if for some reason that user was not created, we're going to create a status of 400 again. And we want to throw an error just to say like, hey, this user wasn't able to be created. So user could not be saved. Okay. And then after the try, we want to do a catch. Just in case any of this fails, this is how you handle an error in an API handler. So you catch the error, you call next with the error. So this is how asynchronous error handling works with Express APIs. So a little bit interesting. I had to look this up and figure it out, but that's how you do it. So you pass something to the next parameter, and that's what triggers an error to be thrown. So yeah, so that's all there is to the controller. Now what we got to do is tie this controller that uses the model to an actual API endpoint that the users can, or the clients can call. So that's what we're going to do next. Okay, so one thing I like to do with routes in Express is to define the routes in their own file according to the feature that they're a part of. So what we can do here is in features, create a new file. I'm going to call it user routes.js. And here it's really a pretty small file, but you can add more routes in here as it gets bigger. But just to start, so we want to import Express, and then we want to import, let's see, register user from where we just were. So the function that we just created, that's going to be the kind of the logic for when this API route gets hit. So import it from there. And then we also need to create ourselves a new router from Express. So to do that, you do an express.router, just like that. So we're going to configure this router with endpoints, and then we will export it. And then in the index file of our server, we'll start using it. So it'll all tie together. So just to show you how that works. So this is a post request when we're creating a user. So you do post, and we want to give a post request to API users, and I'll show you how that all ties together in a minute. Register user. And after that, we just want to export the router that we created. So ultimately, put a comment here so it makes more sense. This is going to be when we're calling the server or calling the API with API users in a post request. So that's what that's going to be. Now to tie this with index.js, where we actually run a server, we need to import this router. So let's go there and go up here to the top. And we want to do an import, not import, 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 and we're going to call it user routes from features user routes. Okay, now what we want to do, first of all, we can get rid of this area here. So user routes. So instead of listing all the routes here in the index file, we created that other user routes file. So to use those as configured in the file, all you have to do is just say app use, and then you give it the path you want it to match. So in our case, we want API users and then the router that you want to handle it. So that's when we use user routes like this. So now the API, how it's going to work, API users is called, it's going to go into here, and then it'll call user routes. It's a router, so it's going to go in here and say, okay, if we're API users and just nothing after that, then we're going to call register user. It's going to go through all this logic, check that the body has everything you need, and check for the existing user and all the stuff we just did. So that's how it's going to work. Now that's all we needed to do. The next thing is just to actually test this out and try it. So I'm going to pull up Postman here and we'll give it a shot and see what it does. All right, one quick update. I made a mistake here. In the user controller, when you're going to use the find to make sure the user doesn't already exist, this needs to be a find one, not a find. So just throwing that in there, go ahead and change that so that this post request, what we use with Postman, will actually succeed. So we'll go do that now. All right, so make sure your server is running and then open up the Postman app. What you're going to want to do is we just want to call that API users endpoint that we just created, and it was a post request. So there are a lot of tutorials and things online about Postman. So if you need to look up some of those, that would be good. Maybe I'll do some more videos on it a little bit later, but for now, just know that I have a workspace that I created called Diablo 2 MERN application, and then I have a collection of some API requests I made previously that I tested to make sure they work, and then I'm going to create API requests while on YouTube video creation, so you can see how it all runs through. So yeah, let's create a request, and again, we're going to create a post request, so we're going to call this post API users. And after we have named it, let's create this instead of a get. Let's do a post. And our API endpoint right now is localhost and port 5000 and API users. So what we wanted users to send over is a JSON body of a username and a password. So we're going to go here, JSON. So again, I did post, put in the URL, body, raw, and then this drop down to JSON. And then you just create your JSON here. So I'm going to do username, and I'm going to do just coding Logan for fun here, and then a password. And I'm just going to call it yikes, it's good, or something like that, whatever you want. Now, what we're expecting is this will create a user in the database and it'll return the data to us. So let's go ahead and give this a shot. And there you go. So you can see we sent over a username and password. And down here in the results area, it sent us back the entire user that was created. So I do see though that the password was not encrypted. So we have a problem there that we'll have to make sure that works right. Okay, I found my two small mistakes with the hashing of the password. So the first one is get salt is not get salt, it's gen salt. And then in the user model, the hash password is a async function, so we need to do an await. Okay, with those two fixes in place, you should be able to get a hashed password back now. So just to show that it works, we're going to do a coding login with just something at the end so the username is unique and the same password. And we'll hit send. So this is going to create a new user. And it responds with the Mongo object with the hash password and no longer plain text. So anyway, there you have it. So we created a API post endpoint. We were able to call it with a client, which in this case was Postman. And after we called it, we got everything saved in the database and it all returned to us. So that kind of wraps up most of this video in terms of the coding. All right, so just in closing, I'll show the database so that I can just, validate that data is actually there. So if you go into your mongodb.com account, log in, and click on your databases, you can go to Browse Collections, and you can see before we had that test database collection that we created, and we never actually created one in here for users, but since Mongoose had that model schema set up, it actually created the collection. And then when you created those new documents, you can see them showing up here. So you can see prefix of the password hashing. You can see the passwords here and the two users. And then you can also see, after I had fixed it, you can see the coding login 3 with the hash and 5 with the hash. So anyway, that's how you can validate that your data is actually in Mongo. You just log in and you can go look at your collections. So yeah, that really does wrap up this video. Hopefully you found it useful. I'm gonna try to keep my videos a lot shorter than my last one because it went way over time compared to what I wanted to do. So anyway, yeah, we'll keep moving on. We'll add more endpoints in the next one and we'll see you next time. Bye.